30 days, $88,000. Or I'm filing a lien and taking your property. That's the threat that landed on my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning from an HOA I never joined, for a ranch I bought at a county auction, demanding money for rules I never agreed to follow. See, I'm Rex Dalton. I've been swinging hammers and fighting bureaucrats for 30 years. When I bought this 40-acre spread 6 months ago, it had been sitting empty for 3 years after the old farmer died. No HOA paperwork in sight. No mention of any association fees. But apparently, while I was fixing fences and clearing brush, some woman named Vivian decided my property belonged to her little kingdom. The smell of her designer perfume still lingered in my truck from when she'd visited to explain my obligations. What would you do if someone tried to steal your land with fake paperwork? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet half of you have your own HOA horror stories. Because what this lady didn't know was that I don't back down from bullies. And I definitely don't pay protection money. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name's Rex Dalton. I'm 52, and I've spent most of my life building things with my hands and fixing problems other people create. That morning, sunlight poured through the dusty blinds of my kitchen window, laying golden stripes across the letter like a warning. The kind of light that makes everything look too calm, like the world's holding its breath before a storm. Outside, the wind carried the scent of cedar and dry soil. The old windmill groaned lazily as if it, too, was tired of the nonsense I was about to deal with. I read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into me. $88,000 in back dues. For what? For fences I'd repaired myself. For roads I graded with my own tractor. For land that hadn't seen another soul in years. Then I noticed something else, the letterhead. High Meadow Estates Homeowners Association. I actually laughed out loud. My ranch wasn't even inside High Meadow Estates. That's the gated community down the road, white fences, imported turf, and rules about what color mailbox you're allowed to have. My property line wasn't just outside it, it was half a mile away. But that didn't stop Vivian. Vivian Harcourt, HOA president, realtor, self-proclaimed queen of High Meadow. She'd shown up one morning in a shiny white SUV, stepping out like she was arriving at a fashion show instead of a dusty ranch. Her heels sank into the dirt, but her smile didn't falter. "Mr. Dalton," she'd said, extending a manicured hand, "welcome to the neighborhood." Back then, I'd thought she was just being polite. Turns out, that handshake was her way of sizing up what she thought she could control. Now, as I stared at her signature on the bottom of that letter, something cold settled in my chest. She'd forged this claim, probably roped the county clerk's office into filing fake paperwork or leaned on her HOA buddies to muscle me into paying. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, watching steam curl into the sunlight, and thought about my options. I could call her. I could fight. Or I could dig. Because here's the thing, when someone threatens what's yours, you don't just react. You investigate. You learn their weaknesses. And when the time's right, you build your revenge piece by piece, just like a house. So I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer beside my father's old pocketknife, and said out loud to the empty kitchen. "All right, Vivian. You want to play property games? Let's play." Outside, the windmill creaked again. The sunlight had shifted, turning sharper, hotter. It wasn't morning calm anymore. It was warning light. The next morning, the sun rose over the eastern ridge, painting the hills in gold. My coffee steamed beside the letter I'd unfolded again, its ink curling slightly from where I'd pressed it too hard the night before. Outside, the ranch was waking up slow, crows calling from the fence posts, the smell of dew lifting from the dirt. You'd never guess that behind that calm, someone was trying to steal a man's land. But I've learned something after 30 years of building homes and breaking contracts: paper can destroy faster than a bulldozer. And Vivian Harcourt was counting on that. I started where I always start, county records. An old friend, Marcus, worked in the clerk's office, the kind of guy who knew which files accidentally went missing, and which ones were quietly added. I called him before breakfast. "Rex," he said, voice thick with sleep, "if this is about permits again." "It's about a lien threat," I cut in. "High Meadow HOA. Says I owe 88 grand in back dues." He paused. "Your ranch isn't even zoned under High Meadow." "I know. But they filed something that says otherwise." There was a long silence, just static and Marcus breathing. "Come by after lunch," he said finally. "And, bring that letter." By noon, the sun was burning white over the pasture, and my truck kicked up trails of dust as I drove into town. County Hall looked the same as it had 20 years ago, peeling paint, crooked blinds, and the smell of paper and old secrets. Marcus met me in the records room, where ceiling fans spun lazily, stirring warm air that smelled like history. He laid out a manila folder on the table. "Here," he said. "You tell me what's wrong with this picture." Inside was a document titled Annexation Agreement, Parcel 12B. My land. Vivian's signature. And beneath it, a county stamp that didn't exist 6 months ago. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "That's a fake." "Looks like it," Marcus said quietly. "Filed under her name. She must have pulled strings with someone up here to get it logged in the system. Most folks wouldn't check, they'd just pay. Vivian wasn't just bluffing. She'd built a paper fortress, one that could take my ranch if I didn't act fast." I left the office and stood on the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun glaring off the hood of her white SUV parked across the street. She was there, Vivian herself, talking to some guy in a suit. When she spotted me, her smile didn't waver, but her eyes, sharp and cold, locked on mine like a hawk. She raised her cup of iced coffee slightly, almost like a toast. That's when I knew she wasn't just after money. She wanted to make an example out of me, show the rest of the valley that no one crossed her HOA empire. I drove back home with my jaw clenched and thoughts spinning faster than the tires. The ranch came into view, fences I'd fixed, barns I'd patched, fields I'd cleared. Every inch of it built by my own hands. As the sun began to sink, I walked to the porch, letter still in my hand. There's a kind of silence that comes before a man decides he's done being pushed. It's not loud. It's not angry. It's just, steady. I pulled out my phone and called an old contact, someone who owed me a favor. "Hey, this is Rex Dalton. I need you to find everything you can on a woman named Vivian Harcourt. Property records, business filings, lawsuits, everything." "Sounds serious," the voice said. "It's personal," I replied. When I hung up, the light had turned amber and long. The ranch looked peaceful again, but I knew peace was a lie until I took back what was mine. Vivian thought she owned the valley. She forgot, this land doesn't bow to paper. It bows to the ones who work it. And tomorrow morning, when that sunlight hits her perfect white fences, she'll have no idea the ground beneath them is already shifting. Morning came with a copper glow, the kind that paints every blade of grass gold before the day burns it white. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the light stretch across the land I refused to lose. The phone buzzed just as the sun cleared the ridge. It was my contact, Eli, a private investigator I'd worked with years ago when a developer tried to undercut a construction bid. He was the kind of guy who could pull a man's whole life out of a filing cabinet. "You were right to call me, Rex," he said. His voice had that scratchy morning edge. "You're Vivian Harcourt, she's got a trail. Tell me. She's not just HOA president. She's also the acting realtor for half of High Meadow Estates. And she's been trying to push county lines for years. Looks like she's been annexing nearby land under the HOA's name, then reselling it once people agree to join." I froze. "So she profits from fake HOA expansions?" "Exactly. She pressures landowners, scares them with liens, and when they sell cheap, she flips it. And mine? Yours is the biggest plot she's tried to take. 40 acres, if she folds that under her HOA, she can extend the boundary another mile. That would triple the property values inside High Meadow. I leaned back against the porch post, the wood rough against my shoulders. The sunlight didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like a spotlight, showing me just how deep this scam went. Vivian wasn't a bored housewife with too much power. She was a shark dressed in pearls. Can you get me proof? I asked. Working on it. But she's careful, everything goes through her brother's law firm in Austin. I'll need a few days. Take what you need, I said, but do it quiet. After hanging up, I stared out at the pasture where the horses grazed near the old oak line. My father used to say, land's got memory, son. It remembers who respects it, and who tries to own it. Vivian had forgotten that. By noon, I was driving back toward town. Not to see Marcus this time, but to visit someone who'd known Vivian longer than anyone else, her ex-husband, Clay. He ran a small hardware store off the main highway, a dusty little place that smelled of oil and regret. When I walked in, he looked up from behind the counter, squinting like he was trying to place me. You're Dalton, right? That ranch by the creek? Yeah. He nodded slowly. I figured she'd come after you sooner or later. That hit me hard. You mean this isn't the first time? He gave a dry laugh. Rex, Vivian's been trying to build her own empire since we were married. The HOA's just her latest weapon. She ruined 2 families before yours even bought land out here. But she's smart, uses the system. Makes it all look legal. He slid a small envelope across the counter. Inside was a photocopy of a document, Vivian's old bankruptcy filing from 10 years ago. She hides her money through shell companies, Clay said. You dig there, you'll find how she funds her little HOA scams. I left the store with the envelope tucked under my arm and the weight of a new plan in my chest. The sun had shifted again, burning harsh against the windshield as I drove back. Every mile closer to my ranch felt heavier, like the land itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. That night, I spread the papers across my kitchen table under the yellow light. Each document told a story, debts, lawsuits, and false names that all led back to one thing, control. Vivian didn't just want land. She wanted legacy. And for the first time, I understood what kind of war I was fighting. I wasn't just up against an HOA. I was up against a woman who built an empire out of fear and signatures. But I've built real things, houses, barns, bridges. I know what happens when you pull out the foundation. As the clock ticked past midnight, I made my decision. If Vivian wanted to play this in the dark, I'd bring her lies into the sunlight. Dawn came soft and golden again, but this time the light didn't calm me. It burned. I'd spent half the night studying those papers, Vivian's shell companies, old filings, and fake signatures. Every document was a brick in the wall she'd built around people like me. But I wasn't here to climb it. I was here to tear it down. The ranch was quiet when I stepped outside. The windmill turned slow. The grass shimmered in the morning dew. It was peaceful, too peaceful for what I was about to do. I went to the barn, pulled down the old blueprint table my dad used to draft house frames on, and spread out every bit of evidence I'd gathered. Then I drew out my own plan, not for a house, but for a takedown. I called Marcus first. Remember that fake annexation document? Yeah, he said. I've been thinking about it since you left. Can you get me copies of every HOA filing Vivian's made in the last 2 years? There was a pause. That's risky. Then do it quiet, I said. You're not doing this for me. You're doing it for every family she's robbed. He sighed. You always did know how to make a man feel guilty. Guilt's cheaper than losing your land. By noon, Marcus had sent over scans of more than 20 documents, each one showing a different, annexed, property that somehow ended up back on Vivian's realty listings months later. The pattern was perfect. Too perfect. That's when I made my second call, to the county auditor's office. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to spark interest. Might be some fraudulent filings connected to High Meadow Estates. You'll want to look at Parcel 12B and cross-check the signatory stamps. Then I hung up before they could ask who I was. Next, I called Eli. You got what I need? Oh, I've got more than that, he said, voice low and satisfied. Found 3 businesses registered to her HOA treasurer. Guess who the real owner is? Vivian, I said flatly. Bingo. And get this, 2 of those companies are registered to receive maintenance contracts from the HOA. She's literally billing herself. The line went silent for a moment, just the hum of static between us. That's enough to bury her, I said finally. Or at least make her sweat. By evening, I was ready. I drove into town again, parking just outside High Meadow Estates. The sun was setting, washing the white fences in amber light that made them look like gold bars, beautiful, expensive, fake. Vivian's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, big and polished, the kind of place that smelled like money and lies. Her silver SUV was in the driveway. Perfect. I walked up to the mailbox and dropped in a large manila envelope addressed in clean block letters. To Vivian Harcourt. From Rex Dalton. Inside were copies of every document Eli and Marcus had dug up. No threats. No note. Just facts. When people like Vivian get cornered, they don't fight, you let them panic. You let them destroy themselves trying to cover the tracks. As I turned to leave, her front door opened. Rex, she called, voice sharp but shaky. What the hell do you think you're doing? I didn't turn around. Returning the favor, I said. You wanted to make me part of your little community. Congratulations. Now I'm your biggest problem. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she took a step closer. You're making a mistake, she hissed. No, I said, finally facing her. You did. You picked the wrong man to bully. For the first time since we'd met, I saw it, the flicker of fear behind her eyes. By the time I drove back to the ranch, the sky was streaked with orange and violet. I parked by the porch, sat down on the steps, and watched the last light fade behind the hills. The cricket started singing, the windmill creaked, and I could almost hear my father's voice again, build it right, Rex. Strong foundations never fall. I smiled faintly. Because tomorrow, Vivian's whole empire was about to crack, and the first fault line would appear the moment the county opened that envelope I'd mailed to their fraud division an hour earlier. Morning came quiet, wrapped in a pale gold haze that shimmered off the pastures like a promise. I'd barely slept, but I didn't need to. Some mornings, adrenaline replaces rest, and this was one of them. The air smelled like wet cedar and freedom. I poured my coffee, stepped onto the porch, and watched the first rays of sunlight slide across the land. 40 acres of stubborn soil and sweat. 40 acres Vivian Harcourt would never touch again. At 7:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Eli. Rex, he said, his voice already buzzing with excitement, you might want to turn on the local news. I walked back inside and flipped on the old TV I kept by the window. The screen flickered to life just in time to see a reporter standing in front of High Meadow Estates. Behind her, flashing red and blue lights painted the perfect white fences with color. In breaking news, the reporter said, the High Meadow Estates Homeowners Association is under investigation for falsified land annexations and embezzlement. County auditors discovered multiple fraudulent filings allegedly connected to HOA President Vivian Harcourt. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew how it ended. Eli laughed on the line. They traced everything through those shell companies. County investigators raided her office this morning. Half her board already turned on her. I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of months of frustration lift like dust in the sunlight. What about my property? Cleared. Completely. The county reversed every annexation she ever filed. You're officially free and clean. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I just watched the sunrise spill across the kitchen table, right where that first letter had landed. The same table where I'd felt helpless, cornered, mocked. Now it felt like victory had a smell: black coffee, sunlight, and justice. By noon, I drove down the road to town. People were gathered near the courthouse, whispering in clusters. I saw Vivian's SUV parked crooked on the curb, doors still open. And then I saw her, standing on the courthouse steps, her perfect hair undone, her eyes hollow. For a second, she looked up and saw me. Neither of us said a word. There was no need. Everything she'd built, the fear, the power, the paper walls, had come crashing down. I parked the truck, stepped out, and walked past her without slowing. The crowd parted a little, their murmurs fading. When I reached the door, I turned back and said quietly, "Funny thing about foundations, Vivian. The ones built on lies never survive the first storm." Her face hardened, but she didn't answer. She didn't have to. Inside the courthouse, I signed the final papers that officially cleared my title. The clerk handed them to me with a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Dalton. Looks like you beat the system." I shook my head. No. I just reminded it who it's supposed to protect. By the time I drove back to the ranch, the sun was high, the sky wide and clean. The fences glowed white in the heat. I stopped by the gate, stepped out, and ran my hand along the wood I'd rebuilt myself. This land had seen storms before, real ones. But it always endured. That evening, I sat on the porch with my boots up, watching the windmill turn slow and steady. The same breeze that used to sound like trouble now whispered peace. I thought about the people out there still fighting their own battles with HOAs, with bullies, with paper tyrants who think signatures make them gods. To them, I'd say this: fight smart. Build strong. And never let fear take what your hands have earned. The sunlight dimmed, the first stars coming out over the valley. I raised my coffee cup toward the horizon and smiled. Because somewhere out there, Vivian Harcourt was learning the hardest lesson of all. You can't own land that was never yours to begin with.